The Last Kindness, a flash fiction of weird tragedy. There is a busy street in Cincinnati, Ohio, filled with fancy cafes, beautiful shops, and bustling restaurants. It's the kind of street that someone who had never been to Cincinnati might not even think the city holds. On that street is a bank. Above the bank's entrance is a logo that says the bank is owned by an international conglomerate which was once based in Asia but is now best thought of as global. Posters showing happy homeowners, advertising the bank's favorable mortgage rates, happy retirees, and the investment products available to them, and even a small poster for an online course to teach the average person about cryptocurrency, tell how modern and current the bank is. Few passers-by on this busy street would know that back behind where the tellers work, behind the offices, there is a bank vault and a set of safe deposit boxes, some whose contents have been there for decades. Box 129 holds two things. The first is a dagger, which is placed inside a holster. The handle, blade, and holster are all made of unusual metals and engraven with a series of strange symbols. The other content of the safe deposit box is a medallion, a simple silver chain, and a black metal circular medallion with no symbols and no distinguishing marks. This is the story of how they come to be there. The timing was just right, such that Andrew Morgan was able to serve in 2 world wars. Later, he would be an officer in World War II, but the story we are telling begins in World War I, when he was a simple soldier. It was very common for him to see a wounded comrade dying from awful wounds as medics tried to attend to the dying man, to stymie the blood and gore coming out. But everyone knew the man was already dead. This was horrific enough, but then came the figure. The figure was a black, cloaked skeleton that would appear beside the dying soldier. When Morgan first saw it, he presumed it was a hallucination from stress. Death was not a living personification, a conscious being, and if it was, surely it would not look so like a stereotypical Grim Reaper. But as time went on, Morgan saw the figure again and again, and something began to hatch within Morgan's brain. What if I could stop that figure, push him out of the way? Then the medics could minister to my dying friend, and my comrades could live. Morgan saw the figure several more times before he worked up the courage to attempt to push it bodily out of the way. Part of him thought it was still a hallucination and his hands would pass through it. But finally, one day, as a soldier lay dying and he saw the figure, Morgan charged with all his force and his hands out. They met something which was simultaneously like heat and cold, but there was material structure under it, and he was pushed back. The skull looked at him for a moment from under the hood, and disappeared even as the man died. Morgan did not attempt it again. However, he spent the intervening years between the 2 world wars, for he could not know another war was coming, but he thought someday he would see the figure again, traveling the world. He went to the salons of London, New York, Paris, and Shanghai, where learned men and women who had gathered lore from all over the world about mankind's encounters with those things that dwell in the other world taught their knowledge and compared the different traditions they had learned. But also Morgan went to the ends of the earth, to the Australian Aborigines, Hawaii, the Polynesian Islands, the Americas, Africa, deep parts of Eastern Europe not touched yet by the modern world, and studied with medicine men, self-proclaimed witches, wizards. He read ancient texts, taking every piece of knowledge he could find, recent and ancient, and all claiming to be anything representing a success of man pushing back on those forces and beings which are beyond his normal understanding. This is when he crafted the dagger. Some of the features of the dagger and the knowledge Morgan obtained were represented in symbols. Others were represented in a careful crafting of the materials and metals it was made of. Others yet were intonations and bells as he forged the weapon. Morgan had combined as much of man's knowledge as he could find about how one might wound a creature of the other world into this single dagger. He did not know how much of the lore and knowledge he was exposed to was true. Some of it, all of it, or none. But he knew this was his only chance, and so he kept the dagger with him, sometimes even forgetting about it. Then the Second World War broke out. He was an officer. One day, he and a few of his friends and comrades were driving in a train of jeeps, ready to supervise troop maneuvers, when a landmine overturned the jeep he was riding in. The two jeeps behind him were unaffected, as was Morgan himself. But not so lucky for the young soldier who had been Morgan's driver. Shrapnel and parts from the car, broken glass, were littered in the young man's body. One of the other jeeps behind in the train had a medic in it who had run to his side, but Morgan knew what was going to happen next all too well. The figure appeared that only Morgan could see. Morgan knew the young man was dying, and it was now or never. He reached for the dagger that he had kept next to his sidearm in its holster on his belt, the dagger he had forged, and charged at the figure, not knowing what would happen, and to his delight, the dagger pierced the cloak and something underneath it. Light poured out like blood, and the creature broke away and stumbled, collapsing at an outcrop of rocks. Morgan turned back. He saw that the young man was still barely breathing, now confident that the medics would save him. But the young man died anyway. Morgan made some excuse in the ensuing moments that he needed to remain alone at the scene, and after about 15 minutes' time, was finally able to go over to the wounded skeleton in the black cloak. "I don't understand. You are Death, and I wounded you in your process, but my friend still died." Foolish, foolish human creature. I'm not Death. Do you think death is a personification? Do you think every blade of grass, every cell, everything that dies throughout all of space and time on every world in this universe only dies because it is touched by a being that carries it out as a process? No, you fool. Death is part of the universe. It is hardwired into it. I am not Death. Think. Have you not seen deaths, but not me, since we last encountered each other during that other war your species held? And Morgan thought to a Christmas Eve at a friend's house when he stayed up watching the friend's cat die. Morgan thought of a scene when he had been in Paris watching an old man being carried out of an apartment building on a stretcher. The figure was right. He had seen death many times since then, without the figure being present. Then who are you? If translated into the language you speak, I belong to a race of beings called the compensations or the kindnesses. There is a space outside all universes, between creations, where dwells an eternal society of beings, older and wiser in tradition than what you would even call God. We know that when a given creation, a given reality is formed, no matter what constants govern it, it may not be fair. And so we send avatars of ourselves into a new creation to try to offer compensation or balance for those unfair effects the constants and the very nature of things will no doubt cause. My siblings, or the avatars of them in this creation, are all gone. And once a given universe is under function, it is separated from the higher space between creations, and no more avatars can be sent in. Each of my siblings had a particular domain, but mine would be called the dream before the dying. I am able to go to those in the last throes of life, particularly those who have not had enough life. I speak not of duration, but of quality, and give them a dream that is very much real. I can even pull the souls of others into it and let them live the life they would have otherwise lived. Your friend there, for instance, when you stabbed me with your foul weapon, was 30 years hence in the future, back in the United States with his family at a barbecue, celebrating something which you will call the bicentennial of your United States. The moment your dagger plunged into me, he was back here to feel that death fully. I am the last of my kind, the avatar of the last of my kind, in your reality. Similar rare circumstances, like the one you have brought forth today, has ended my siblings, and now I will rejoin them in the space above creation. Morgan did not know what to say. The figure and his cloak also vanished, but he did leave behind a black medallion on a silver chain. Morgan studied it, but was never able to get it to do anything, give up any knowledge, more than any piece of jewelry would. He was not sure if the medallion could be destroyed, and if it could, should he? Nor was he sure his dagger should be. But he also could not think anyone to give them to, and so he placed them in a bank deposit box in Cincinnati, Ohio. He prepaid for 75 years of containment for the objects within in that deposit box. And it will remain so for another 25 years. When that payment runs out, a few decades from now, the items will be sold at auction. What happens then, no one knows.